Alright, welcome back to FastGadgets. So what we're going to do today is install a virtual machine using Kali Linux, and it basically is the same as our other virtual machines that we've installed recently. If you haven't seen the virtual machine installations for Windows Server 2008 and Windows 7, make sure you check out my tutorial section in FastGadgets on YouTube, and you'll be able to find videos for those two installations. So I'm going to click Create a New Machine, and I'm going to do Custom. Actually, I'm going to leave it Typical. I don't need to do Custom. And I'll click Next, and I'm going to browse. Now, normally, I keep all of my ISOs in one location, which is in the ISO folders on my external drive. In this case, I actually have two copies, so I'm going to use the ISO in my Downloads folder, and I'm going to use Kali Linux. And the reason that I'm doing this from my C drive is because it's an SSD or a solid-state drive, and it's going to be much faster. So I'm going to click Open, and it was unable to detect which operating system that I'm installing. So I'm going to click Next, and I'm going to select Linux, and more than likely Kali will not appear as an option, so I don't see Kali anywhere. What I do know is that this installation is essentially Debian based, so I could choose Ubuntu or a Debian based installation. And let's see if there's any generics, because if you're just not sure, you can always do other Linux or Ubuntu. Let's see if there's any other options we could take. There's many Debians. I think what I'm going to go ahead and do, because the kernel is actually newer than all the kernels listed here, I'm going to select Ubuntu. That's probably about the closest I can get. And I'm going to click Next. And I'm not going to call this system Ubuntu, I'm going to call it Kali Linux. And I'm going to change the location. Remember, I like to keep all of my virtual machines well organized on a portable drive in a VMware Virtual Machines folder, because I do use other virtual machine software such as VirtualBox. And I'm going to make a new folder, and I'm going to call this one Kali Linux. I click OK. And I now confirm that I have it on the E drive, my portable drive, VMware Virtual Machines, Kali Linux. I'll click Next. I think 20 gigabytes is probably more than suitable for the drive size. And as mentioned before, I'm going to set it so it splits up the virtual hard drive into many individual files that are less than 2 gigabytes. And the important thing about that is, if I wanted to use a thumb drive to copy my virtual machine from one system into another, it's very important that I select this option, or a FAT formatted thumb drive will not allow me to make that copy. And I'll click Next. 1 gigabyte is more than suitable. 20 gigabyte split, and we're guessing it's Ubuntu. We're going to see how well it installs. It's going to try and use the automated approach. Okay, so it has not powered on, so I'm going to go ahead and power on the virtual machine. By default, Kali Linux is going to boot and do a live CD. Now, in Linux, a live CD basically means that if we had a physical CD and we put it in the CD drive, we could reboot the computer and boot from it. And then what I want to do is, I don't want to have to boot up knowing that the ISO is available. So if you do a live installation, the ISO must always be available in the exact same directory every time. I want a Kali Linux installation that is standalone, that doesn't require the ISO to be in the same location. So I'm going to take the graphical install option. Incidentally, when you're using VMware Workstation, most times you cannot use the mouse. So if that's the case, you'll see I have an option down there that says press Ctrl-Alt to release the mouse. I can do that. So I've started the graphical installation. I'm going to continue and say English and United States, and in my case American English, and it's going to go ahead and do the installation to the virtual hard drive of my virtual machine, which is being hosted on my Windows 10 hardware platform. This particular virtual machine here is actually a 32-bit. I choose 32-bit most because typically with a 32-bit installation, you can pretty much guarantee it's going to run on any system. Okay, so it wants to know what we want to call this particular host name. I think I'm going to name it something a little bit different. And I will click continue. Okay, so I cannot use an underscore, so I'm going to go ahead and do Kali VM, because it said I could use the minus sign, so let's try that. We don't really have a domain set up, so I'll just call this .home. And we need to enter the root password, so I'm going to use the default, capital P, @ SSW0RD, and then I need to re-enter the password, capital P, @SSW0RD. And I want to show this password so you can see it. I'm actually using lowercase s's here, not dollar signs. So I'm trying to make it as simple as possible in a lab environment. Of course, if this was a real environment and I was using this in production, I would not want to use such a simple password. Time zone is Eastern, which is correct, so I will click continue. It's detecting partitions and disks. And I'm going to do guided and have it do the entire disk. So I'll click continue. And it has found the 20 gigabyte disk that I created in VMware. And all files in one partition is fine for what we're going to do. And I'll click continue. And I will finish partitioning and write changes to disk. So I will click continue. It says if you continue, we're going to write the changes to disk. So for whatever reason, if you were doing this on a physical system, you don't want to overwrite the operating system that's already there. You would click no. If you're sure it's okay to erase the disk and install Kali Linux, which it is because we're going to do it on a virtual machine, I'm going to go ahead and click continue. And Kali Linux will install to disk. Okay, so to continue with the install, once everything's been installed to the disk, it'll ask if I want to use a network mirror to supplement the software that's included on the CD-ROM. For right now, I'm going to say no and continue. And I'm going to get rid of this screen to see if there's anything I'm missing. Doesn't look like it. Sometimes when you're doing the install, the OK button can be lower than the actual visual part of the screen is, so you can't really see if there's an OK button or a next button to click. And the Grub Bootloader is being installed, which we need to be able to boot up. I will click continue. And I do need to make the newly installed system bootable, and I'm going to use dev SDA, which is the virtual hard drive we've created. Once the installation is complete, we do need to do a reboot so that we boot from the actual hard drive instead of the bootable media. So I'm going to click continue. And shortly here we will reboot. Alright, so our system is rebooting. You may see some odd errors. If you do, don't be too concerned. As long as the system boots up and we know we can do what we need to do in Kali Linux, we should be fine. On the command line during boot up, you may see several errors of this type, which is perfectly fine. Alright, so we do not have a username yet. All we have is the root installation, and by default the password for Kali Linux is Tor, T-O-O-R, which is root backwards. Just to mention, that's only for the live CD, so the actual password is the one that we entered earlier. And I'll enter the password. And eventually our GUI should come up. Alright, Kali Linux has booted up fully. It uses the GNOME interface, which has a menu bar on the side. We have an Internet Explorer, Firefox web browser, not Internet Explorer. We do not have Internet Explorer on Linux. And below it is the terminal, which we'll be using from time to time. Access to our files, some other tools that are used quite frequently. And the tweak tool if we want to do tweaks. Now the first thing that I am going to do, I'm going to right click, actually I'm going to close the browser. I was going to say minimize, but let's go ahead and close it. And close tabs. And I'm going to right click I'm going to click the applications and then type in settings and go into settings, and I'm going to go to displays and the only display, and by default I'm currently at 800 by 600. Now there are no tools installed, so we have to manually set the display, which is perfectly fine. And there's a couple of different settings here that we could use. You pretty much have your choice. Now 1920 by 1080 is essentially running the display in full HD, and we really don't need that much room, but it would be nice to have more room than what we currently have, so I think I will go with the 16 to 10 1280 by, let's try 800, and I will go ahead and apply, and say keep changes. And if I wanted to, I could go smaller. I could go down to 1280 by 768 and apply and keep changes. So this way we have a little bit more screen real estate available. It's not very likely that we would be able to install the virtual machine tools, which is perfectly fine. So we now have our Kali Linux installation completed, and I can go ahead and click the power button and power it off. But before I do that, I am going to check one thing. Remember that we want all of our systems to be on the same network. So if we're going to be doing the labs in the Lab Manual for Security Plus Guide to Network Security Fundamentals, we want to have all of our systems that we've created on the same network. Now this one currently will be using DHCP. So if I type in ifconfig, I can get a quick look and I can see that I am indeed on the same network as my other systems, so I really don't need to do any special configuration to Kali Linux. Everything is set up the way I need it to be. As long as these first 3 octets are the same, we know we're on the same network as our other machines. For those of you who are following along with me on the tutorials, you do not need to have the lab manual or the book that comes with well, actually the lab manual comes with the book, but if you are interested, we're using the 5th edition Security Plus Guide to Network Security Fundamentals and its lab book that is associated with it. So if I wanted to, I could go over here and power off the system, or I could just type power off, and eventually this virtual machine is going to shut down. And I now have all 3 virtual machines that I will need ready to go.